Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the latest Wednesday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, where, as always, and we haven't done it in quite a while, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop and bring you interviews with your favorite comic book creators of yesterday and today. And, guys, you're not seeing things. All three of us are here together at the same time. It's been a while since probably the first episode of the year. At any rate, we hope you guys enjoy this interview as much as we do. But before we get to it, what do you say we introduce ourselves? I'm Joe Marcello.
I'm Warren Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
And today we're bringing you probably the king of independent comics. You know him from his work on Strangers in Paradise, but I know him from some work he did on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Birds of Prey, so many others. We're talking about none other than Terry Moore.
Yeah, I think Joe hit the nail right on the head at King of Independence because he took his own ideas outside the superhero realm and all that and created such a successful independent book that, it still lasts and it's still relevant till today. And that's really a credit to his writing and his creativity.
I was very excited to do this interview with Terry. He is a big hero of the independent scene, as Orrin and Joe have said. Strangers in Paradise, that's where you primarily know him from, right? The adventures of Katchoo and Francine, just quite unlike anything else that's out there. And he continued along that path with titles like Echo, Rachel Rising, Motor Girl, Parker Girls. He even has a Paradise 2, which is kind of this collection of all of his early strips and sketches and things like that. That's going to be coming out on Kickstarter, so look for that. But for now, let's get to it. This is Terry Moore. Terry, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks for being on. We really appreciate it. So we start you off with the patented first question, which is, how and when did you first discover comics?
Oh, okay. Like a little boy, six years old, and probably the first what I remember reading first was like Sugar and Spike and Dennis the Menace comics. Um, Sugar and Spike was I don't remember it doing anything for 6-year-old Terry, but I do remember 6-year-old Terry liking Dennis the Menace, and especially after I've been reading that for a few issues, I found a fatter one, like a 48-page one, and it was Dennis the Menace Goes to Washington. He went with his parents to go visit a town. They saw the stuff there that was there, and it was the first time for me the comic broke the fourth wall, and I thought, okay, this is really cool now. It's not either just fantasy or my awful life. You can actually combine these two, and that was cool. I like that. I remember that. It made an impression on me.
Do you happen to have any of the physical copies that you first read through?
No. Long gone. They're in a landfill in Alabama somewhere. I'm sure.
I'm sure. So Dennis the Menace, I guess back in those days, brought the, craziness and messiness to Washington, as opposed to what it is now that he can't bring any more messiness, I'm sure. Not to get any political, but just in whatever your stripes are.
He was like, he was always finding trouble, even though he was very upbeat and very positive, but he was very energetic, and he could walk into a room and everything is fine for about 20 seconds, and then suddenly it's chaos. And it's a lot like hanging out with Billy Tucci. He's the closest to Dennis the Menace we have.
Good to know. We're hoping to speak with him too, but hard to pin him down, just like Dennis the Menace. So you weren't always a cartoonist, at least in your career, early part of your career. I read that you were a musician at one point, also video editor. So how did you make the decision from those careers to take the leap into comics?
I grew up doing two things, playing the guitar and drawing. So I always had those Strathmore black sketchbooks you can buy anywhere. And I was putting both songs and drawings in there. And I grew up reading comics. I loved comics even as a musician, I was reading comics until um, the issue where Gwen Stacy had pushed off the Brooklyn Bridge. And then I threw that one out the window of the car and didn't read comics again for about 13 years. Um, but I thought my life was going to be music, and my wife married me as a musician. But it was all clubs, in Texas, and that's a hard life. And either you stick with it and give up everything to make it, get further, or you take pity on your family, which is what I did. I had, a young daughter and all that. And being a club guitar player is not a great way to. It's a struggle to raise a family at the same time and be wholesome. So my dad was an independent filmmaker, and I left the bands and I started working with my dad. And he kind of, like gave me a chance, you okay? You've hit a wall over there. Come on, I'll give you a second chance. And I started working on these independent film crews, and eventually that led to an editing suite where I was a videotape and film editor, and then eventually random access on the Apple Avid systems. So I had a long career doing that, but I did that for about 10 years. So now I'm young 30s, and I'm tired of being in a dark room and working for clients. So, I have 7 people behind me telling me cut there. And I wanted to do something for myself. And I looked for what made me happy. And I ended up back looking at comics and comic strips again. And I thought I was looking at some comic strips that had a fairly good profile. And I thought, well, I can draw as well as that. Maybe if I can get a good idea, I have a chance. So I spent a couple of years trying to get back into comic strips, newspapers. And that's what I was doing. And when I did my first comic book issue, Strangers in Paradise #1, and it was nothing but a Xerox that I dragged around for a year, showing to everybody that would listen. And people would look at it and they'd say, yeah, you keep going. And it got me interviews with newspaper people and all that. But, I didn't have the exact newspaper product they needed, something that made sense. And it didn't work. So my future was never going to be in comic strips. But I kept making them for myself. And then I met Jeff Smith, and he explained to me one day at dinner how self-publishing worked back in 1992. And I was old enough, serious enough, and desperate enough to try it. So I had been, here's something I haven't told you. I've only told a couple of other people this. I'll tell you. The year before I self-published my first issue, I spent a year trying to talk Fantagraphics into taking me. And I wasn't talking to Gary, I was talking to somebody else who was the gatekeeper. And he would send me critiques, and I would try it, critiques, I would try it again. It just never worked. And after a year, I met Jeff, and he said, here's how self-publishing worked. Don't give a publisher most of the money, just do it yourself. It's easy. And so I tried it, and here we are. I never looked back. And years later, I was standing next to Gary Goff, and I told him, I spent a year trying to come over to your house. And he said, damn, I wish I'd known that. They never told him.
You ever think in a alternative world what that would have been like? How
Earth
it
2,
would have
Terry?
maybe changed Strangers in Paradise and you?
It may have affected Strangers in Paradise, because I always felt like Strangers in Paradise was a little too milk and cookies for Fantagraphics. I'm not a West Coast guy, especially not a Northwest guy, and that culture and all that. And so I was a little bit older than most of the stable, and probably a little too conservative. I have teeth, I have fangs, but they're from more like the underground cartoonists that I was reading in high school, like Robert Crumb, and those guys. So by the time I got to 1993 and was ready to start my comics, I had also read a lot of Peanuts. So you combine Robert Crumb and Peanuts and you kind of get me. As opposed to, listen to Slayer and draw a bunch of blood and gore, and you get a whole different kind of edgy comic. I just wasn't that.
Well, it's never too late. If you want to, you can discover Slayer at any age. Um, I find it interesting the background or sort of the evolution that you went through in that you started with comic strips, but didn't find that that was the narrative form that you can tell the story you wanted to tell. And so you did go towards comic books. But you were using, this is the material, Strangers in Paradise, was very different than what most comic book content was like. I mean, even if you're talking non-superhero, and even if you're talking sort of those independent books like Bone and Cerebus, and had some sort of fantasy element to it, but you were really talking, if not slice of life, I mean, not necessarily American Splendor or something like that, or not biographical. But it was real life. Um, were you anxious in any way to sort of bring what would normally be maybe a comic strip kind of focus to a comic book format?
I didn't know any better. I didn't know enough to be afraid. I was just desperate for a new career. And this was my third chance.
Hmm.
I'd already done music and then editing, and none of it worked out. And here I am in my young 30s. I'm desperate. I need a way forward. And once I decided that the comics was going to be it, um, I was just unstoppable. I mean, there was no more self-doubt. It was just like, do it. It's a strange thing. And that's not something I can brag that I do. That's not my usual way. My usual way is to be neurotic and overthink everything. But for that first early couple of few years, it was like I was so glad to walk into my first comic book convention. I remember going to San Diego Comic Con 93, I guess, or 94. And God, I mean, if you think about the previous two careers I had, the comic book convention was a breath of fresh air to me because I'm in this room with thousands of people and everybody is there because they want to be. I'd never been in a room like that before. Um, so the vibe was incredible and it attracted me, and I was so happy to get any ground I could get, like, oh, you have 300 readers. Yay. Great. Because last year I had none.
Right.
We'll work from there. So yeah, my attitude was great in the first early years.
It's so interesting as to when you started this book and it being even in the, industry and in the number of other titles that were out. It's right in the middle of that big image push and extreme art and things over the top. And here comes, Strangers in Paradise, black and white, not a muscle to be seen. Well, maybe a little bit. But yeah, that must have, I mean, I'm just trying to think of that. But you're looking at it as, well, there was nothing and now there's something. And so no matter what's happening around the industry, this is a story that, I want to tell and is worth telling. Where did you get the idea? Go ahead, you can react to it.
I do have a reaction real quick, which was it. I don't think I could have done it at any point earlier in my life, because if you go back to everything before my first comic book issue, Strangers in Paradise #1, if you go look at all my work before then, all of it is so you can see my influences. My problem with newspaper strips, with the comic strip artists and the underground cartoonists, was I admired those guys so much that I was just doing my impressions of them. It's like it's like walking into a club and the guy is playing a beat up old Strat and doing his best Stevie Ray Vaughan, you know. Okay, well, good for you. You learned how to do that, but you're not Stevie Ray Vaughan. And, you know, it's kind of like Elvis was cool. Elvis impersonators are a joke, you know, and Peanuts was cool. But if you're doing a Peanut style, we don't need you. We already have the best. And so I had spent years learning that lesson. You know, you're not you're not Jeff Beck, you're not Jimmy Page. You never will be. You're not Charles Schultz. You're not Robert Crumb. You never will be. We already have those guys. You need to do you. And so when I was hit rock bottom and you know at the age of 32, 33, and I decided comics is my way out, I understood do your thing. I saw all those other comics that were coming out in 92, 93, multiple covers, all these hot young stars that were like rock stars. Um, these guys, and they all drew different than me. And not once was I tempted to ape them or copy them or do what they're doing because I'd learned my lesson, man. You cannot do that. The last thing anybody needs is an old guy like me pretending he's Jeff Scott Campbell. You're not. You know, the best thing I can do is just do what I do and get really good at what I do. And I know that when I look at my work, I see my influences, but now instead of having 3 influences, I have 1,000. So
Hmm.
good luck trying to find them all. And hopefully if I get the recipe, like, you know, it's like you only have so many ingredients in the kitchen, but you keep still making these great recipes. And that's how it is. You know, you, you take mhm, I don't know, you take everything from, well, Doug Snade, the cartoonist, pointing at my bookshelf. Doug Snade, the cartoonist who did all those great cartoons for Playboy. I mean, my influences go all the way back, and you can look at my cartooning there. And, you know, it's just the influences are there, but they've traveled so many miles now that, and I've twisted it so much that now it's mine. And that's the most valuable thing you can have is something you can call yours.
Well, I think that was to your advantage having started in the industry later in life of having learned that lesson, because then you don't go through that terrible phase that I think you were describing that probably a lot of artists go through, where you're just trying to get as good as your heroes
Yeah.
before you find your voice.
I even put out a book of all my old stuff. It's called Paradise 2. And if you flip through it and look at the strips and all that, you can see, you know, all kinds of stuff and where it's coming from and how taking this and putting it all on the floor and then looking for the most basically I did. I I took all these strips, I put them on the floor, pulled out everything that was derivative and put it over there. And what the only thing that I had left was any work that had these 2 or 3 characters, which was this foul-mouthed tough girl, and then the girl next door, and then the only guy who was gentle enough to be allowed in that circle. And that was my Katchoo, Francine, David trilogy. And so I took that and just wrote the story that I already knew in my head. And that's how I got here.
You just anticipated my last or my next question, which was, about sort of the kernel of the idea for Strangers in Paradise. But it seemed like you had, to your point, you had these ingredients,
Well, I had the
and
characters,
yeah,
and I didn't know what to do with them. So I'm driving around town one summer running errands, and I live by Rice University, and there's a lot of student housing. And one time I was sitting at the parking at a light, and I look over, and there's a duplex. And for some reason, I could imagine Katchoo and Francine and David living in that duplex on the second floor. And I could see the windows and all that. And I could picture the living room and picture them in there. So I came home and I drew a picture of everybody in one room. And when I drew the picture, I thought about how that person related to that one, to that one, to that one. And then I added the boyfriend of Francine's that's no good and jerking her around. And next thing I knew, I had it. It was like the best story meeting ever, which was just draw the group photo first. And then once I saw the group photo, I knew how it worked.
What I liked about it, and I went back and read the early stuff, the first few issues, is that it doesn't take time or even the pains to ramp up. It's just it just starts as if it had always been going, and now all of a sudden just the camera was on. And I thought that was so fresh and also very confident, I think, in terms of starting a book that, and you maybe didn't think about how long it would last, but a book that would last, now over 100 issues, right? Um, oh, how did you know where to start in their story? Did that take a lot of thought as to where you were going to just pick up?
Well, that's my TV film career experience. Catch a moving train. Um, so you don't start the movie with Princess Leia being a little girl and watching the powers shift and grow up and da da da. No, you just jump right into it. And the one of the things I realized when in my editing career was that, and then especially once I got into comics, it was confirmed. You talk to people in comics, they've seen every movie you've seen. They've read most of everything you've read. We have this shared world that we all love. I mean, and so they'll catch on real fast. All you have to do is imply that, you know, the starship is just outside the window. Everybody's got it. We know. Okay, what are we going to do about it? So there was like that. I mean, it was like everybody's had, if you just walk into the middle of the room and these people are talking about stuff you don't know about yet, it can be far more interesting than if somebody lays the groundwork for you outside before you come in. So I wanted to do like that. You walk into a busy room, everybody's moving, and I picture it. I picture the play like that. If it was a stage play, you would want to catch that scene mid, you know, you don't start off by talking about the weather. It was a dark and stormy night, or you just dive in.
Yeah, no stage directions.
Hmm.
Um, so it was a black and white comic. I'm curious whether you had ever given thought to putting it into color from the very start. And if so, why not? And if not, why was that a very conscious choice to keep it black and white?
What I needed to do was put the comic out as regularly as possible. Um, I needed to form a habit that people got addicted to, which was get that out as fast as possible. And I couldn't really get it out every month, every 4 weeks, but I could get it out every 6 weeks. And that did not leave me time to color it,
Hmm.
which in those days, I knew a colorist and he did it with colored inks. I mean, you're talking about the days of Photoshop 2.0.
Yeah.
You're right. There was no Wacom tablet. You have a mouse. Um, and back those days, it was a real mouse. They gutted it. No. Anyway, um, it was a long time ago. Everything was primitive. And if you could get a colorist, it took a long time. You had to plan for it and schedule around it. And I just wanted to haul ass. I just wanted to make a page a day and then get it sent right to the printer and then put it right out. And everything that I had loved growing up, except for Marvel comics, all the indie stuff had all been black and white anyway. So um, I didn't have any qualms about just continuing in that genre. When I got about halfway through Strangers, which took me 12 years to make, I was about 6 years in, and suddenly everybody was pushing me to color it. Okay, start putting them out in color now, the collections. But by that time, if you ultimately I ended up with a 2,300 page book, and if the colorist is 75 to $250 a page, it was at least $25,000 to color it.
Yeah.
So For $25,000, I mean, we could have a hell of a party and not color it and say we did.
Yeah. I mean,
So
yeah. Are you gonna make that? Are you gonna make that back just from the color? And also,
exactly.
yeah. I mean,
Eventually I did meet colorists that were brilliant and would do a fantastic job. They're in sync with exactly what I want
mm,
because I want something weird. I like it when when it's understated, more of a cross between Japanese and European, Italian.
okay.
So I like the skins to be blended, but I like all the physical things that are not human to have cuts in them and stuff like that, and
Okay.
then blends inside the cuts. Um, so it's a weird thing, and I've worked with some guys who are really really good, Brian Miller and um, Steve Hamaker are really got in sync with me on that, and they did my colors, my covers. They could have either one of those guys could have easily done the whole run, or any of the other books I've done, but the money.
Yeah.
So I think that's the kind of thing. You know what? Jeff and I talked about it. Jeff Smith and I talked about it over
Hmm.
the years, and we decided we were trying to probably on retracing Hergé's steps with 1010. That
Mm,
originally came out as newspaper periodicals or whatever in black and white. And then when Castleman bought it, they repackaged it and colored it into what we have now. Um, they originally came out in black and white. So I would need a Castleman to come along and buy me out. And then they can package it and make it gorgeous. Because I really
there you
feel like
go.
the way when I make these books, you know, I do a color cover and then I just do black and white or whatever. I feel like it looks like it's at my level. There is another
Hmm.
level, but I can't afford it. You know, you have to have a big daddy to afford that. I don't think a creator like me can afford to. If I did color it, what I would have to do is slow down and work as slow as an Instagram artist. You watch them on their videos and they're just like this, you know.
They
Uh,
usually speed it up so
right.
they can get it all in.
So that, you know, the thing about making a story is you want people to get addicted to it. So we need a new episode on a regular basis. So black and white it is.
Yeah. I
When
think
I'm
that's a
finished, somebody else can color it.
trade-off you always want to make, especially if you're in the middle of the series and producing it. The momentum, you don't want the momentum to be
Mm.
disrupted, especially if
You don't
it's,
want to wait 3 months for issue 2 because I'm trying to
right.
figure out a Wacom tablet.
Good point. So narratively, as the series went on, you introduced, or maybe it was just sort of organic, more of a thriller type influence to the story. That it was more than maybe I keep calling it slice of life, which is not really, I don't think, the best descriptor. But basically, that there was more of a narrative, I guess, mystery or something having to do that the characters would have to, engage with. How and when did you make that decision to introduce that element?
Um, because in the first miniseries story, I kept writing these checks, I kept alluding to Katchoo's bad past.
Hmm.
Katchoo has this bad past, and I never showed it. And then eventually, I knew if I was going to keep the series going, I had to pay up, so to speak. Like, okay, prove it. What do you mean bad past? She got in trouble in high school, and what? Um, so what I did was I pulled from my experiences traveling out to LA with my dad to work on and to work on shoots and sets and all that, and staying at the Beverly Hilton and encountering the working culture of Hollywood. That behind the scenes, and the stars are there and they're around, but it's not about that. It's about the producers and what they do at night and how they court clients with money and cocaine and women and booze, and they'll do anything to get the job. There's just a really seedy side to it, you know? And it's actually in the news right now, kind of like it's a little bit like what's in the news right now from this guy that was courting clients with that kind of stuff. And it was there a long time ago. This is just a guy that got caught. But um, every rock band in the 70s that went to LA, they partied like you would not believe. And there was a culture in LA waiting for them that served it. And so I knew about that. And it was shocking to me, being from Texas and naive, when I first saw that. But it stayed with me for years. So that's in my mind when I'm coming back to you now with Katchoo and saying, oh, she had a rough time in LA. And that stuff's in my mind. Um, and I never would have thought of it being a lady madam running a bunch of girls until when I was in high school, I heard a Elton John song called All the Young Girls Love Alice.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's worth a listen.
Okay.
Bernie Taupin, the lyricist for all the Elton John hits, wrote an incredible little poem there about a girl who is the favorite of all the rich ladies in town. And they're passing her around. And that's Alice. And then Alice ends up being found in a subway dead. But all the young girls love Alice. So it's a wicked song on this beautiful album, you know, Yellow Brick Road. And I don't give a shit about anything else on that album, but I never forgot that song. It stayed with me. So you put together All the Young Girls Love Alice with that god awful party culture in LA, and you kind of come up with what Katchoo went through. That's what was on my mind that she was alluding to. And she comes back to Texas with PTSD. And so a lot of her lashing out is acting out from this everything that she saw that was so wrong. One of the things about PTSD is that you go somewhere and you see some things that are just not the way human beings should treat each other, whether it's this or that or whatever. And then you come back and you're standing in a supermarket looking at an aisle full of groceries and cereal, and you're trying to figure out, you know, that life doesn't make sense anymore. So that is what Katchoo is struggling with. She's a really strong person. Otherwise, she would be in a facility. But she's living with Francine and trying to have a relationship with somebody that will help her pull her out of that, you know. Now, the crime drama stuff, where that came from was something else I remembered from a kid. You know, like I can remember Dennis the Menace, the comic. But I also remember in the 60s and during the James Bond era when all the men thought they were James Bond, and, you know, the Ipcress File and all those movies where it was intrigue, and the Cold War. Cold War. There was a famous scandal in Britain in 1964. It turned out that one of the British House of Lords guys had a mistress. Turns out she was a Russian spy, and everything he said in the bedroom went straight to Moscow. Uh-oh. And the thing that I thought was so brilliant about it all along was that she was more effective than James Bond. James Bond, if he wanted something out of you, he would hold you over a cliff or beat it out of you. But you could go tell your mistress everything tonight, you know. And I thought, that's brilliant. So I combined the seedy LA 70s rock culture with, you know, the Russian spy, and you end up having Darcy Parker, who lives, she was wealthy, and she's sending her girls out into the bedrooms of all those homes around the rich and wealthy in LA, getting their secrets, and then she can blackmail them and make a ton of money. Those people will pay anything to keep their secrets, and Darcy knows that. And people like Katchoo and the other girls that work for Darcy, they're fantastic at walking into a room and sweeping you off your feet. And next thing you know, you're at a disadvantage, you know. So it's those those elements are what went into the character, the background character of the crime drama that's in Strangers in Paradise, and it plays out in a new way.
It makes me think of a iceberg. That you see, what you see on the surface is such a small piece of what is ultimately, underlying the surface.
I love characters like that too.
Yeah,
You get a character for the first 3 chapters, you think you got it, and then oh, oh, oh,
yeah.
oh,
You open the aperture.
yeah.
Yeah. That's really, yeah, brilliant. I like it too. I mean, I think it's for these type of character-driven stories, which all stories should be character-driven, but is really, I think, helpful and keeps a narrative moving along, but also keeps it centered on the character. Because it's always just one more layer to uncover.
Peeling an onion
Yeah,
is how it's described, and the trick to it is you can't just make up crap and add it on as you go. It needs to have been there all along.
yeah,
And it was the reason why she threw a wrench on page 3. You know,
right.
you don't just make it up on page 70. You have to know what you're doing. And that was the case with my book, Motor Girl, who a Marine comes back with PTSD. But you don't know that in the opening pages. They're working in a junkyard and talking about jazz. But there's just constant little things. That's weird. That's weird. That's weird. That's unusual. And there you go.
Did you know, looking back, well, not even looking back, looking forward, I guess, in year one, had you had the opportunity to do this for as long as you did it, did you know where it was going and what would be uncovered? Or was some of it you planted to come back to, and other parts were sort of you discovered along the way?
What I wanted to do was, this is weird because I had no cultural help at the time. This is before, this is back when people were still coy with their identities and what they felt. But what I wanted to do was take 2 people from both 2 ends of the spectrum and have them cross over. I wanted Katchoo to heal. I wanted Francine to open her eyes and realize that love may not be where you think it is. It's standing right in front of you all along. You know, the Judy Garland thing. I've always been home. That's what it's about.
Right.
So inside of me, I have this really heartfelt romantic. I want it to work out. So I pour that in there. I knew that they were going to get together eventually because otherwise it would be mean to write the story and if they don't get together, then it's like writing Gwen Stacy and then throwing her off a bridge, which is the worst mistake you can ever make in a comic book. So I knew I knew they were going to get together. I didn't know that it was going to take over 100 pages. I mean, over 2,000 pages and 100 issues. I got a long ride, and I'm glad I did. But eventually, they got together, and you know, to me, it's my Wizard of Oz ending. You know,
Yeah.
you realize this person is your home. They've been there all along, and they heal each other. They fix each other that way.
Right.
So it's cool.
Yeah. Sort of a full circle. Well, it's satisfying, but you earned it instead of
They worked for it.
exactly instead of just if I can use someone just wants so and so to get together, in a TV show, and so they put them together, and it's just doesn't work at all.
Rachel and Ross.
There's right.
Rachel
Yeah.
and Ross worked for it, but if you go back and forth too many times, it's like, oh, fuck it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm afraid Katchoo and Francine went back a lot for it, but not too much, and they worked really hard for it. And every breakup fight they have is a breakup fight that we've all had.
Yeah.
So we can all relate to that, and the door slamming and retreat to your corner and the best friend that's going between you two and all that kind of stuff like that. So it's honest.
Yeah.
It's what
I
we all
agree.
go through.
It's as I said, it's earned. So I definitely wanted to take some time for some of your other work as well,
Mhm.
which I love just as much. After finishing, at least the first time finishing Strangers in Paradise, you and maybe you had done some work all along during that run, but you definitely got some mainstream, or as the big two, work with Marvel and Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane and Runaways. Um, was that ever part of the sort of career game plan? Did you or did you always think, I'm just going to do my stuff. I'm going to do Strangers Paradise. Maybe I'll do some other ideas that I have. Or did you always want to, dip your toe in those waters?
I said yes to those jobs because it felt like going to play guitar on somebody's one song on their album. You would do that.
Yeah.
It's no big deal. And I enjoy playing with other people's books and characters like that. Um, but it's, it's once I was self-publishing and had my own world, I knew where I belonged. And if I were to go to DC and just do DC books for 5 years, it would be so good for my career. Um, and it's a much higher profile. But I don't own those characters, and you're getting page rate. And um, if they change the book in come this September, they decide to kill the book, you're done. And you know, there's just if you work for a publisher and eventually you're not going to work for them, you got to go find something else to do. I've already found my something else to do,
Hmm.
so I want to stick with it.
So let's talk about some of your other things you did on your own. And one was, or basically the follow-up, I guess, is in the second of your major works independently was Echo. Can you talk a little bit about where that idea came from?
Uh, I love science fiction. I grew up reading Heinlein and Ellison and Asimov and all that. Um, I loved the world of possibility of if we just understood, a little more about the reality of how we're here, that it would open up new worlds. So I having grown up in the atomic era, I was very aware of the dangers of progress in that area. Um, the movie doesn't begin to cover. It doesn't mention the fact that when I was in grade school, we all had atomic bomb drills, which was, um, go to the hall, get on your hands and knees, put your head to the locker. So all the kids are lined up in the hallway like that way. Um, and that was to help you from the shockwave blast as it bashes in the windows and tears apart the rooms and all that. But even at my young age, like the age of 7 or 8, when that was going on, I knew that it would be so hot that whatever I'm touching, I would be fused to it. They would find my blackened Pompeii crusty corpse fused to whatever I'm touching. So I remember one time being sure that I was next to the girl that I thought was pretty, I had a crush on, and I reached over and touched her hand during the bomb drill so that if the bomb, we'd be fused together for life. that was my atomic plan. But that's a hell of a
Yeah.
thing to put into the head of a 7 or 8 year old, to know that. So I love science and progress we're making. But when I was a kid, the reason I mention all this was because when I was a kid going to elementary school, I was in Huntsville, Alabama, and they have the Redstone Arsenal base. My dad was working there making films, training films, and once a month they would test the engine that they were building for the rocket that was going to go to the moon, the Saturn engines. These engines were massive, and when they tested them, it shook everything in the whole town, and they would run for about 45 seconds, and we all knew what it was, and it was just like, okay, teacher waits, and boom. That's how big those freaking engines were. So anyway, I just kind of grew up thinking I was 10 years away from a moon base, anything was possible. So yeah, I love science fiction. So when I got my chance to write another story, I decided I wanted to write science fiction. And one of the most influential stories I ever read in my life was Deathbird by Harlan Ellison, about somebody who wakes up and realizes, oh, this is all BS. I'm out of here. And they start transforming, and it opens up a whole another world. I just wanted to write something about, what if you take all that kind of atomic power that they're all working on, and they've learned how to weaponize it and put it into like a Suriyami metal suit, and would we be safer with that power in the hands of the government and the people who made it? Or would we be safer just to take it and give it to a regular person who is just, and trust them to do the right thing? And that's the basis of the story. That incredible power of all those smart people ends up having a fallout, and it falls onto this lady who is down on her luck, nothing special, just a regular person like us. She ends up with all of it. And when she realizes it's a bomb, she won't give it back. And the chase is on. And that's the story of the book. That was the premise of the book. Are we safer with just giving it to you? Or should we let Redstone Arsenal keep it and do whatever they're going to do with it? And by the way, they're really pissed off at these 7 nations, by the way. And they're not above mentioning this in a meeting. So, or do we give it to George and let him run off to Colorado with it? So that was the idea of the book.
Ordinary person, extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah. Which are the kind of stories I like the most, I guess.
Yeah. And another one in yet another genre was Rachel Rising. Were you, I guess, coming off of Strangers in Paradise, although that had what we talked about in terms of sort of a little bit of a crime thriller, maybe, genre. Were you looking for projects, or did the ideas come to you in these different genres? Like you wanted to um, maybe explore things that you weren't able to explore in more of a straight ahead or somewhat straight ahead narrative?
I would, Echo wouldn't fit in Strangers, and neither would Rachel. Um, Strangers never lays down the groundwork that we're going to have this much latitude with what reality is. Although I did later on have some of those characters all in the same room. But yeah, I wanted to, you can tell that, mixed with my little boy naivete, learning all these big things about the world and being stunned by it and carrying it with me, that ends up in my stories. And then I'm a romantic. That ends up in my stories. But I'm also have a morbid side. It's like, I know what this stuff looks like when it's toast. And I if you pay attention to physics and all that, eventually you go through this arcing and you end up at the end. So I was looking at horror stories that way, like Um, what happens if you're here longer than you're supposed to be? What happens if, you can't leave? And I began to think about people like characters like Lilith, um, who is, according to Jewish mythology, is cursed to walk the earth until the end of time. Do you realize how mad she is about that? And what would it be like for her to watch all this change and watch this planet fill up with people? And everybody who's ever lived is now buried in the ground beneath her. To her, the planet is a one big graveyard. Everybody who's ever lived is crunching under her feet every day. It just must be driving her mad. And so working from that point of view on it is something that I feel like I'm able to do that other authors haven't tapped into. Some people who are more mature than me and more balanced than me may look at Lilith in terms of, a sequence of events. Then they did this, then they did that, then the machinations come in here and influence it, blah, blah, blah. All that adult talk. All I can think of as an impressionistic child is, God, she must be pissed off. And how she looks at us. There's not one thing you can say to her that she has never heard before. There's nothing you can say of interest to her. So what is it like to be her? Who would we get to play her as an actress? I mean, when she walks in the room, what kind of vibe is she giving off? I bet it's not good. And so I began to think about the character like that, and I just cannot wait to draw it. And I thought about sometimes when I was editing, and once in a while you have the advertising agency, and then you have the person who hired them, and that person is powerful and wealthy. And sometimes they would come into the edit suite to look at the thing. And so I have been around a few people that, um, lived in Learjets and all that, and had a lot of companies, and they're just on a different, they're in a different bubble. They're in a bubble that we don't breathe their air, and it's evident when you're in the room. It's not like, hey, I'm Terry, how are you? It's not like that. There's a barrier there, and so I was able to pull from that and give that to Lilith, as opposed to Rachel, who her stepsister, who's the exact opposite. You can go up and talk to Rachel, tell her who you are. I don't think you want to do that with Lilith. So that dichotomy of characters was so enthralling to me, and what this planet must be like for them. And again, we're catching them in a modern era, and they've been here forever, the whole time. And but you have to catch up as we go along in the story.
So is that your in for a lot of these stories? Is the sort of the point of view, like stepping into the skin of the main character and trying to understand what their perspective is like?
Yes, it's not about a clever sequence of events. It's not about a murder mystery that I figured out. It's about, why would somebody want to kill their boss? What would drive you to do that? When is that okay? What would it take? There's your story. Not how you got away with it, but what drove you to that point. So I'm more of a character writer.
Yeah.
And I think that's all we really care about. And the thing is, too, the more you know about someone, the more you care, usually, if they're a good person. So giving these details about people's lives is a way of becoming involved in the story.
Right.
If you ever read just a transcript of just the political movements of Star Wars, take the characters out and just look at a transcript of what happens from a CNN point of view.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be very enthralling.
No.
The whole point is, these characters stuck in the middle of that giant engine. So that's how I feel about the story. It's worth my time to make sure that by the time you finish the book, you know exactly who the character was. And maybe I didn't answer every physical question about what happened, but you certainly have a relationship with somebody you didn't know before.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's makes for a more interesting read. to be honest. I mean, you're in some ways you're trying to identify with these characters and understand their motivations and feelings. And um, if you can't engage with them, if you can't find something that you identify with, then it just becomes, very surface level plot. Which,
And
sometimes works in different in places.
yeah,
At least it's
yeah.
serviceable enough. But if
There's a
there's something
difference
that's
between just that plot and caring about the
right,
people. There's a
right,
there's a gap. I used to describe it like this. Here's an example. It's like if I told you a story about a mom who made sack lunch for her little kid and the little boy and sent him out the door and watched him walk down the street to school. Um, and then he comes back in the afternoon and she's asleep on the couch. And he, does his homework, makes her dinner, puts her to bed, goes to sleep. That's a writer who does. Then they did this, then they did that, then they did
right.
that, and then they did that. Okay, here's my version. This mom drags herself out of bed every morning, sick as a dog, because she is in the final stages of cancer. And she wants to be at home. She doesn't want to go spend the last days in a hospital. So she's at home with her son, trying to give him memories. And she makes the lunch and she puts a note inside, I love you. And she wants him to find that at lunchtime. The boy, she kisses him on the doorstep. She doesn't have the strength to walk him to school 3 blocks away like she used to. He goes, she watches him as long as she can. Then she goes back and lays on the couch, falls asleep. And he walks around the corner, and there are 3 kids there who don't like him because he's small. And they beat him up, push him down, take his lunch, and throw it into a ditch. And he never sees the note. Now you care about the boy and the mom. That's the
Yeah,
difference between the 2 stories.
for sure.
That's how I write.
I like it. Um, coming up on, a couple more questions. One you may have heard before and you may have answered before, and hopefully this isn't too repetitive for you, but obviously you enjoy writing female protagonists. They're usually at the center of most of your stories. Why are they more comfortable for you? Are they more comfortable for you, or maybe they're less comfortable, and that's the challenge? Is it sort of, do you find that there's more of an emotional richness to women's lives as compared to men, or what is it that keeps you coming back to women as protagonists?
I think it's probably because I've always been in love. I mean, I probably had my first crush when I was 5 or 6. I love women. Um, I fell in love with the actress of every movie I've ever watched. And I don't give a damn what happens to the guy. He asked for it. Whatever he gets, he asked for it. So, yeah, I mean, I've always focused on the women in my life. And now I've been married my entire life, and I absolutely adore my wife. Adore my wife. We're inseparable. So I just really focus on the women in my life. I love my mother. My dad was kind of unapproachable. He was more of a Sean Connery type guy, and very strong and bold. And I wasn't strong and bold. I was more like, you know, um, reading the news and like, oh no, that lady was Russian spy. She's going to get in trouble. Oh no, those people in Hollywood are hanging out with a bad crowd. Oh no. And my dad's like, they get what they deserve. Um, so I don't know. I'm just kind of wired to pay attention to the emotional side of life, and because of that, I was always feeling connections with the women in my life. So um, I guess when I think of a story, if I need to move a truck from one side of the junkyard to another, I can get any guy in the story to do it. But if I need somebody to explain to me why that's morally wrong, it's probably going to come from my female character. And now I'm listening. Um, so I don't know. There's a part of this that is indefensible. I know I should be balanced, but I'm not. And that's my identity, that's my flag. That I have to own this, that if a guy's in the room, then I have a history of guys all the way back to like when I played football and sports and cheap auto racing and stuff like that. And I think of all the stupid things we did, all the thoughtless things we did, how mean we were to each other and other people and all that. It's just, I turned my back on it. And the people who were making sure that the house was a home are the people that really ended up meaning something to me. So that's when a woman talks, I listen. And if you just shut up and listen to what people are telling you, they will tell you who they are and they will tell you their story. And then it's a matter of what are you going to do about it? What do you do with it now you know somebody's story or you thought of something. So you end up with this writer's responsibility to like, okay, let's move that into a story here and let you be represented here. And it's the reason why Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, or, you write any story that's about something that's not you. It's because you're listening and you're thinking about it and you care, and you want to capture that on the page so that somewhere in the future, somebody can find it and see it from a point of view that is explained. If I never write the detailed version of the mom with cancer and the little boy, you may never know. You may have only always see that other quick version. But if somebody will explain to you why these two nations are at war, or why that bag of sack lunch was so important, that's the responsibility of the writer. And if you do your job correctly, then it's good for the people who read now and hopefully later on down the line. Those kind of things are timeless. What we wore 20 years ago looks silly now. But how we felt 20 years ago is timeless. That story will always be relevant. So it's worth spending your time to make it happen.
It sounds like it's part and parcel of, your perspective. Like you just couldn't do it any other way. It is if you're being true to yourself, these are where the interesting stories are, these are where the interesting characters are. And you shouldn't be made to say, oh, you have to be balanced this way or that way. So I think, it's an interesting perspective. And I think like people and like work that has a strong perspective to it.
I'll give you an
So
example of
what's
somebody
that?
who so much was Agatha Christie and her character Hercule Poirot.
Yeah.
She wrote 50 stories. About halfway into the run, she decided she didn't like this guy. And the second half of the books are so different from the first half because she didn't like him. She stopped sharing all those charming little personal things that made him an adorable eccentric, and switched to just a whodunit. And then it's just the machine. Then they did this, 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 and she took away all that personal stuff. And to me, it just breaks my heart because I really loved the character, and she got mad at him, took him away from us that way. And you can see the stark difference between the first and the last books.
Did she
So
ever explain that?
there's an example in reverse.
Yeah. Did she ever explain that other than
She
she
just
just got sick with
later
the
on, when
character?
she was with her husband in Egypt and all that, and people would ask her about it, she said, "I just don't like him. He's an insufferable little snob and very selfish, and I just decided I don't like people like that." And oh my God. So it is possible for a writer to, develop this wonderful little character, decide halfway through the story they don't like him, and then take all that adorable stuff away. And this difference is stark.
Yeah.
And I wonder sometimes if that's not what happens when you take an ongoing long comic book character and hand them from writer to writer to writer to writer, you know, which is how you end up tossing Gwen Stacy off a bridge. Not that I'm bitter.
No, I only mentioned it 3 times. That's
No.
fine. That's the outer limits.
You notice
Well,
I'm not saying who wrote that because he who shall not be named, and I went to a show a year or two ago, I forget, somewhere over in the East, and he was there and he had a booth and a banner, a big banner up behind his table that said, "The man who killed Gwen Stacy." I felt like the Home Alone kid. Oh my God, no.
Adding insult to injury.
Oh my God. So, I mean, I guess he owns it, but no, 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 no. We're just backing away from that slowly.
Yes. Homer Simpson backing into the shrub.
Nope.
Well, Terry, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. But I want to give you, a few more minutes to talk about, well, first of all, whatever's going on right now and in the near future. We'd love to know what new works are coming from the mind of Terry Moore.
You would think my head would be empty by now. But I still have some things I want to do. And we actually have a Kickstarter we're going to start and I think we're going to announce it in just a few short weeks, like January, February. And it's just going to be a reprint of my comic strip, the book I showed you. I just so happen to have it here, my teaching aid. This book, I'm gonna update it and get some of the older crap out of it and put it back out on the Kickstarter, so you can get my, early work here. All the characters that I write are all in their dramatic form, through the early stage. And then after that, it's time for the next new story. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to put it out because I think that the days of putting out a comic every 6 weeks, it may be over for indie guys like me. It's a different format. So I'm seriously thinking about doing the next story in its entirety and then making it a Kickstarter book. And then once it's done its Kickstarter thing, I'll do what I did with my art book, then give it to the distributors. So everybody gets it eventually. But Kickstarter, the reason why it's become so good for people like me is, well, are you aware? Here's why. Because you get paid to do the work. You have an income for a year while you make the work.
Right.
Which was famously a kind of a famous thing inside comics last year. Neil Gaiman wanted to do a book and asked for an advance, as I understand it, asked for an advance for his artist, who we all adore and love. And the company would not pay the advance for the artist to live on while they worked for a year to make the book. So went to Kickstarter and blew that advance money out the roof. And I'm so happy. That's the power of Neil. And thank God the artists can have the money that they deserve to work, to live on while they work. But also, I'm thinking about the person who turned down the advance at the publisher and having to go into a meeting the next week and explain why they just let say it was $200,000 advance, go away and go over to Kickstarter and become a $1 million enterprise.
Yeah.
So it's a new world. And
For sure.
that's the good side of Kickstarter, that it allows people like me to have money to live on while I work and make a book for you. And it's not something that a publisher can provide. So usually publishers and audiences expect a book to exist, and then they will give you $1 for it. What did you live on while you made that book? So the old days of making these single issues and living off single issue to issue while you make a trade, I'm not sure I can do that anymore. we're lucky to have had it for around the direct market around for as long as we had it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the future holds. If it comes around really strong in the next 2 months, I'll give it another shot. If not, thank God for Kickstarter.
Oh, for sure. I mean, so many folks are going that way and have had a lot of success that way and just enjoy the process. I mean, I know there are sort of, logistical nightmares that happen every once in a while in fulfilling orders and things, but from a creative standpoint and from a, freedom standpoint, I think it just offers so many opportunities that the traditional model doesn't. And yeah, publishers certainly are losing out, at least the ones that are not understanding how good the alternative is.
And we're back. Great interview, Mike. I obviously we knew Strangers in Paradise. I didn't know the full breadth of the work he's done, so I found this to be very eye-opening and very interesting. So, seemed like a really cool guy and a great interview.
Yeah, we have a lot of new independent writers on the show and creators, and I hope folks out there listen to what he had to say, because talking about putting the scene together like he has and what it took for him to get his book out there to become successful, it's really good information for folks out there today.
Yeah, Terry is really a, paradigm shifter sort of in the independent comic scene, how he was able to get this the Strangers in Paradise kind of off the blocks and really make it into something special. And then just continuing to do a lot of independent stuff. And, he has different stories and different genres, sci-fi, horror, the slice of life kind of things. And he just continues to put out, what he wants to do. And sometimes he works for Marvel and DC and others, but mostly he has his own ideas and he executes them, and to great success. So, Terry, thank you for coming on. Thank you all for listening and viewing. Please remember to rate 5 stars, review, subscribe, do all those great things to help the Dollar Bin Bandits get to the heights that Terry has gone to. So we appreciate it, and we'll see you next issue.